It's been a long haul, 6 years, she told me. So we sincerely congratulate Nicole on her achievement and her future. Her presentation this morning is entitled, "We Can't Go Home." Small in numbers, not everyone has an opportunity to encounter Unitarian Universalism in their local community. We know that there are people who would appreciate encountering our liberal religious voice if only they knew it existed. In these times when we can't go home, perhaps there is another way to meet people on their travels. Nicole looks forward to joining us this morning and sharing her welcoming gifts of community ministry. Nicole.
When one person tries something new, the ripples are endless. Joseph Tuckerman studied with William Ellery Channing at Harvard. They both became Unitarian ministers at the turn of the 19th century. Reverend Tuckerman ministered to the congregation in Chelsea, preaching twice on Sundays and ministering to the people of the congregation. Chelsea is not too far outside of Boston, near the ocean. The community was filled with sailors and their families. And so Reverend Tuckerman learned about their lives. Sailors gone from their families for months at a time, the impact of those who stayed ashore, and the poverty that they experienced. He wanted to help in any way he could, and so he helped to provide food and clothing. He served that congregation for 25 years before he resigned, but his call to ministry was far from over. He went to Boston, determined to help those who were underserved. There he met more sailors, factory workers, farmers, people who had recently immigrated to the United States. His heart encountered people who couldn't afford enough to eat, didn't have fuel to cook or keep warm, people who didn't have enough money for shoes or clothing, whether for themselves or their families. His old roommate and friend, the now Reverend William Ellery Channing, had just helped to create the American Unitarian Association. So Reverend Tuckerman turned to his ministerial colleagues in the Boston area for support, and he became the first minister at large of this newly formed association. The goal was to help those on the margins. It was such a new concept to have a minister who was not working in a congregational setting. Not only that, but he also insisted he be compensated for his work. He brought together that formal training while keeping ties to the local congregations and the larger association. He had spent so many years studying for ministry, and he realized there was so much more to learn. He became curious about what services were available through the government, what had been done in other religious organizations, studying what worked and what didn't, and naming what was missing. Importantly, he went and spent time with the people themselves. He asked them about their experiences and their needs. He heard their stories about loved ones who died on the job, illnesses that could not be treated for lack of money for a doctor, people who had to leave home because they didn't have enough to cover the rent, children at the age of 4 and 5 who had to work long days to help the family afford food to eat, and elders with no one to care for them. As he listened to their needs and their stories, he also encountered messages that he had learned from his privilege. The refrain went something like this: "Don't offer money because it could be used to buy alcohol. Don't offer help. People are simply lazy. We need to encourage them to work harder." He recognized this privilege and he went out among the people to help them, providing what they said they needed. And the people he helped, they spoke words of gratitude. They weren't accustomed to getting what they said they needed. Instead, they were expected to be grateful to receive what others assumed they needed. As the minister at large, he was not alone in this work. He brought back to his ministerial colleagues all that he was learning from the people about their lived reality, what it means to be human. He helped bring awareness of that privilege of class and encouraged his colleagues and the congregations to do that work of spiritual growth. Tuckerman stayed connected and collaborated with those ministerial colleagues in the area, and together they formed the Benevolent Fraternity, a place in each neighborhood where people could get food and clothes. Over the years, they started to offer schools for children and summer camps. This organization lives on today under the umbrella of the UU Urban Ministry. Tuckerman is known as the father or patron saint, if we had those, of community ministry. The first in our Unitarian history to serve as a minister outside of a congregational setting. There was no expectation and no ultimatum that the people he served had to make their way to a Unitarian church and call it home. Instead, he went to the places where they already were to live out this call of welcome and care and service to all. This form of ministry continues today, bringing our values into faith-based and secular settings, including school campuses, prisons, hospitals, long-term care and hospice, service organizations, the military, soup kitchens, street ministry, law enforcement, it's a long list, disaster relief, and counseling centers. For community ministry, the world is its parish home. I have been in the military for 18 years now, and home can be a difficult concept to pin down. My friends have signs in their place that reads, "Home is where the military sends us." And it's followed by a series of plaques, all of the places where they have been posted. It can feel as though you are never there long enough to call a place home. I've been lucky. I haven't had to move as much as others. When I moved from Toronto to Borden in 2016, I remember distinctly not wanting to lose my church. I had found my home in Unitarian Universalism, bringing with me experiences from other religious traditions. I made plans to keep Sundays open as often as possible, and it worked for a while. Reality soon set in because what I was asking for myself and my family wasn't realistic. A 3-hour round trip that doesn't include the service, preparing and packing lunches, a wiggly little one, committee meetings, and coffee hour. And watching online, that only made me want to be there more. It was grief. I was losing my church. And so where do you go if you can't go home? I still needed church. I needed to gather in spiritual community to renew my sources of strength and hope, to sing and make music. I needed the harmonies and dissonance of life shared with others. I did what our Unitarian Universalist ancestors here in Canada have had to do since the beginning of our tradition. When folks emigrated to Canada, whether from England or the United States, they often did not find a congregation in their local area. And so, in an era where church attendance was expected, our ancestors found themselves in the pews of another denomination. In many cases, they were also barred from participating in congregational life and rituals, present but not included. I attended one of the chapels on the base where our theology differed, and I could still be with people. We could make music together. I stayed connected to our tradition through connections with ministerial colleagues, meetings and retreats and services when I could. And it was the book, The Call to Care, which sent my heart soaring. A collection of essays from Unitarian Universalist community ministers, people bringing our faith out into the world today. My heart could say nothing but yes to that call. The good news of our faith, that we are meant to be interdependent, that we are meant to support one another, that no one has it all figured out, and that all of us are worthy of love and belonging, and no one is beyond saving. That is lived out every single day. Nowhere in those pages did I read about a need to convert others to our tradition or even really introduce the idea of going to church. Instead, I read people following Tuckerman's path, meeting people in the context of their daily lives, working alongside them, learning from them, and being changed by them. This is the work that we are called to do in our daily living. It is our shared ministry. In my work as a chaplain, there's something that we call the ministry of presence. At the hospital, we like to call it creative loitering. This is when we make it a point to go out among the people to be present, hallways and break spaces and out in the garden. In the military, this looks a little more like working out with the unit, stopping by the orderly room to greet human resource administrators, or out on the hangar floor where the aircraft technicians are busy at work. It is the simple act of making oneself available, which is part of building relationships. But underneath it all, there is a theological message. I am here if you need me, when you need me. And when you do, you know who I am. Kate Braestrup, the author of the book, Here If You Need Me, shares about her story where she became a minister after the death of her husband. You see, it hadn't been her dream to become a minister at all. It was his. As she was making meaning of the deep grief and loss, she decided to explore it and in some ways lived it out for both of them. She is a chaplain who supports search and rescue efforts, where in her work she has borne witness to great tragedy and great joy. One day she was supporting someone, and this was her response. She smiled. I'm not really here to keep you from freaking out. I'm here to be with you while you are freaking out. Or grieve, or laugh, or suffer, or sing. It's a ministry of presence. It is a showing up with a loving heart. There is a gift in our very presence, in that showing up with a loving heart. We might not have the means to change a situation, certainly not to dismantle complex systems of oppression with one new idea. But the real gift in being present comes from being exactly who you are. This is the way that we bring our faith into the world. The love that we have to offer as we make space for silence, conversation, offer a meal or a smile, that can become the seed of hope and strength for someone in their day. We all need a little help from our friends. This ministry of presence, though, isn't only a gift for the person we are ministering to, but also for the one doing the ministering. In that act of extending care, sometimes to someone who on the surface can seem so very different from you, a relationship is forged. Viewpoints can differ, life experiences are vast, and when we stay present with it all, it can be the moment that opens the door of welcome, which starts with our own heart. This is how we come to truly love our neighbors as ourselves. And this is what our faith calls us to do, to bring more love into the world today and every day. We work to make real the words of Reverend Theodore Parker, who said, "Be ours a religion which, like sunshine, goes everywhere. Its temple, all space. Its shrine, the good heart. Its creed, all truth. Its ritual, works of love. And its profession of faith, divine living." The world is our home, as imperfect as home can be. And it is where we all minister. The work of community ministry, it is all of ours to do. May we make manifest these works of love across all time, all space, and in each of our hearts. May it be so. Blessed be, and amen.